For my brother, what I love, for myself only Allah do I worship and asking for help. Every day 5 times must I always pray. I am proud to be a Muslim now. Everyone say La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May Allah's peace, blessings, and mercy be upon you. We were just having a small discussion on the title of today's episode of Knowledge to Action. The title is Pons to Pons. A very confusing title, but intentionally placed. The reason is because it's a concept that we often do not discuss or talk about. Our own self-esteem and how we view youth in society and how we view people. So the concept, pawns to pawns. We were talking about what is a pawn with the W. It's that chess piece. It's a sacrificial piece, the smallest or the weakest piece, unless used very strategically. And if the pawn goes through the entire struggle and gets to the end, still can never be king. Right? And the pawn in the beginning can do 2 moves. Very motivated, go, 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 but then no, stop. Can't go back to be in the comfort of family, but move forward. And all of a sudden they can only move one by one. And not only that, they're no longer consistent. If they want to successfully do something, it's not a straight path anymore. It's a diagonal. They got to go off of their original course to be successful. So there are so many analogies of how sometimes we view ourselves as pawns, sacrificial pieces in somebody else's game, in somebody else's vision or mission. Rather, we should view ourselves as pawns, P-O-N-S, which is a fundamental piece in the brain. Without pawns with an O, you couldn't exist. You wouldn't survive. And even if you did, life would not be enjoyable at all. So today's episode is about taking ourselves from feeling like or being treated like pawns, sacrificial pieces, to pawns. We don't even need to change the way we say it. We just need to change what's going on inside of us. Starting with a continuation of last week, and that's stop procrastinating. Don't delay. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam realized with ilmul yaqeen, with clear certainty and clarity, how important it was to pray. And how important it was to tell us that prayer is a pillar of our Islam. And prayer reminds us we put first things first, priorities. We prioritize what really matters here and now in the moment. Sometimes when we delay things for so long, we turn to others for help, but really what we want them to do is to take care of the problem themselves. And when you if you allow somebody else to own your problem, you're allowing them to own a part of you. We got to be very careful not to give up that izzah. And usually it happens when we're stuck in a problem. All right? But another thing we have to understand is that there's an analogy. Dinosaurs and panda bears. That's what I call them when I do work back in Canada. What's a dinosaur? A big structure that's almost immovable. Now, we're not talking about individuals who are dinosaurs in communities. No. We're talking about dinosaurs are those things in our life that we feel is unchanging. I can never change. That's a dinosaur. That's a dinosaur of a thought, because it stands there blocking you from success. Panda bears are a different type of destroyer of success. You can build something for 6 years, like a bamboo shoot. Bamboo can grow for 6 years. You've got this program or this project, or you've been working on, enhancing your own self-esteem for 6 years. And this panda bear comes in and destroys so much. Eats it up in one sitting. So we have to identify the dinosaurs in our lives, those unchanging, unmoving thoughts, those rigid ways of thinking that don't allow us to move forward, and also the panda bears in our lives. Those things that destroy our progress. Imagine you've got a great relationship with a loved one for years. What's one thing you can do that you know can destroy that relationship? That's a panda bear. Imagine you've been learning so much, you've been building on your sincerity, and you do that one thing and you know it's wiped out the last 5 years of your progress. That's a panda bear. So we have to identify dinosaurs and panda bears. Perfectionism is usually a dinosaur. Perfectionism involves those negative or those unchangeable thinking processes that block us from progress. We want to talk about that a little bit today. And a low self-esteem is a panda bear. Usually can destroy so much of our work. Right? When somebody looks up to you as a leader, and then all of a sudden your self-esteem starts dripping, and then they see you in a weak state, you've ruined that. So we got to be very, very, very careful about some of these things. Okay? We're going to first differentiate between ihsan, right? That concept of perfecting the process, with perfectionism, which is trying to perfect the outcome. That's the major difference between the two. Cool? All right. A question for you. Are your affairs getting easier and easier, or harder and harder? And the question to ask yourself is why? What have you been doing right to make things easier and easier? Or what have you been doing wrong to make things harder and harder? فَإِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا. Right? Verily, with hardship comes ease. So why are things getting harder and harder? What are we doing wrong to make things harder and harder? One of it could be perfectionism, or if things are getting easier and easier, we're engaging in some form of ihsan. Where does perfectionism come from? Usually 3 places. It could be self-oriented. The perfectionism is you. It's got to be perfect. But define perfect. You define it. Or somebody else defines it for you. Usually parents, right? Or a teacher. This is exactly how you have to be. Or it's socially prescribed in society, especially you brothers and sisters who are studying the deen, studying religion, and you've taken on a religious lifestyle. People hold you to perfectionist standards, right? You can never make a mistake. And if you do, oh, I thought you were a sheikh. You make jokes? I thought you were a sheikh. You play basketball? You're supposed to be a sheikh. Oh, okay. So what does a sheikh mean? A 40-year-old man? So sometimes they get socially prescribed perfectionism. And sometimes we fall into it. We got to be exactly how society wants us to be. See, when negative perfectionism kicks in, it affects motivation, right? We're afraid of failure. Whereas ihsan, motivation, is a desire to keep improving. Make sense? So the process is what you focus on. The outcome is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second you want to make sure that the outcome is perfect, you're engaging in negative perfectionism. But when you want to perfect the process, you're engaging in ihsan. How do you feel when you do a task? If you feel good about yourself and you enjoy doing it, chances are that's ihsan. But if you feel so uncomfortable and you find yourself going off in a million different ways all the time, chances are negative perfectionism, right? Your perception of reality. Usually, an ihsan, somebody engaging in ihsan, has a realistic view of reality. Knows his limitations, has common sense, but still wants to perfect the process. Wants to do everything possible to make sure there's no mistakes. Whereas a person with a negative sense of perfectionism usually withdraws from reality. They engage in have an unhealthy view of people, view of things, view of expectations, and it usually leads them to avoid interacting with people, right? So it's a withdrawal from reality, according to some studies. Somebody with ihsan is able to be flexible, is able to shift things around, right? If you talk to people studying fiqh, you'll find there's differences of opinions on many things, right? There's some flexibility there. Whereas if you talk to somebody who is an extremist, or a negative extremist, right? They have such high standards that cannot be compromised or altered regardless of the situation. Now remember, we're not talking about aqeedah issues. We're not talking about issues of the religion. We're talking about sometimes cultural things. When it comes to our faith, yeah, we don't back down. Of course, this is who I am. You can't ask me to compromise on my identity. But you can ask to compromise on other things. And the problem is with negative perfectionism, this is the way it should be, this is the way it has to be, no matter what happens. So all of a sudden now you're a traveler, but you're not doing qasr. Why? This is the way it's always been. Wrong sense of reality, no flexibility, right? Even though the flexibility is permissible. And you can use several examples, but of course, we're not knowledgeable enough to get into some of these things, so we won't. All right? And that's okay. There's many other areas where perfectionism actually impacts a person's life. And I'm hoping that you can ask yourself, am I a perfectionist? Am I a perfectionist? Do I want to make sure that the outcome is 100%? Or am I focusing more on the process? That's a very key aspect to assess your own level of perfectionism. Is it ihsan that you're aiming towards? Or is it actually perfectionism because somebody else is telling you this is how you have to be? Or you're telling yourself that this is the way it must be? Or you're placed in a role in society where somebody's already defined that for you? I think perfectionism and self-esteem have a lot in common. When we come back from the break, we're going to talk about a few strategies, knowledge to action, on overcoming negative perfectionism. We're going to discuss self-esteem and self-confidence, and then inshaAllah ta'ala, we will hope to bring us one step closer to helping ourselves and helping others. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah.
Why does Islam say, what is the purpose of our lives? When you go to the grave, the believer will be asked 3 questions. How many, destruction of marriages, of society, of family ties have come because of statements made on someone's tongue, by what someone has said. What Sharia really is, think about it. But we want you to think about it. Think about life. Think about your purpose in life. Think about the creator of this earth we live in. Think about how you should worship this creator and who this creator is. That's our aim behind this show here on Huda TV. Let's focus on what Islam itself says as a legal Islamic religious system.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May Allah's peace, blessings, and mercy be upon you. So, perfectionism. We've heard the word before. Sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative. What are some things, in your opinion, help you to identify some strategies to overcoming perfectionism? I know before the break we were talking a little bit about, was it aspirations? Yeah. Do you want to enlighten us a little bit?
Sure. I mean, when you're some of the things that you were talking about, I was reflecting upon them. I think that a positive aspect of perfectionism is when leaders strive for high aspirations, when we set high aspirations for our youth and community leaders.
Absolutely. So you have high goals. Having high goals is not negative perfectionism. In fact, having high goals should be what everybody strives for, right? Here's the thing. Do you enjoy the process or the outcome?
Well, actually, this is a study that happiness kicks in during the process and not during the outcome.
Isn't that interesting, right? While you're doing it, you're actually enjoying the process. Stop and think to yourself, if you're not enjoying what you're doing, chances are there's something wrong. That does not mean that it's a difficult task. I mean, you could be working, building a masjid, and you're holding all of the heavy stuff, and you're the laborer, but you enjoy what you're doing. You feel like you're contributing to the world, you're contributing to your purpose. So here's the thing about perfectionism. If you never see the outcome, are you okay with it? If you never see the outcome of your work, are you okay with that?
If it's in akhirah.
So, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, be sincere with your religion. يَكْفِيكَ الْقَلِيلَ الْعَمَلِ. If you're sincere, sometimes a small deed with super sincerity can be enough. And so, ihsan must be accompanied with sincerity, right? To act as though God sees, as though you see God. And if you cannot do so, know that God sees you. So you're constantly being monitored, evaluated. Here we are on TV. Chances are you're not going to do an embarrassing act while you know people are watching you. Ihsan is knowing that Allah is watching you. So it's impacting every decision you make. Whereas negative perfectionism, as Brother Nick said, it's when people are watching you, because it's the opposite, correct? Cool. So, lofty goals. And in fact, you're right. That is one major strategy to overcoming perfectionism, is set smart goals. You know exactly what it is you need to do. Don't be vague. So other brothers, even on the Huda TV, you can access how to set SMART goals. And SMART is an acronym. Specific, measurable, I like to say agreed upon, realistic, and timely. There's got to be a time limit. I want to read Surah Al-Kahf on Friday night, on Thursday night, within 30 minutes. In this location, it's very specific. You know when you've achieved your goal and when you didn't. You know it's realistic. But if you say, I want to read the entire Quran in 3 hours, well, it's physically impossible. Unless somebody's going to go to our website and say, no, I've done it. Well, in that case, I'd like to talk to you in person. All right? When you set smart goals, you're able to identify small wins. And that has a lot to do with motivation, as we started off. Negative perfectionism impacts motivation. There was a story I heard once. I have to identify the research a little deeper, but during the Oklahoma City bombings, right, people dead all over it, disaster, terrorist attack in the United States. And there was bodies all over the place. And the dogs were sent out to go search for bodies. And they couldn't find any. They couldn't find any people alive. Over the course of some time, the dogs stopped working. So they didn't know what was going on. So they called in the dog psychologist, right? The canine specialist. And this individual advised them. He said, your dogs are depressed. Your dogs are depressed. Why? Because they're not achieving their goal. They're not achieving their purpose. Their purpose, that what they've been trained to do, what they've been readied for the last few years, their whole life has brought them to this moment, and they're not achieving their goal. So he said, get the dogs out of the scene. So they got the dogs out of the scene. They said, take your volunteers and have them scatter and lay down in the rubble. So they did so. Then they brought the dogs back. And the dogs started sniffing around, and they found live human beings. And their depression cured. It was situational. Once they saw one win, they were ready to get back. Those are dogs. Imagine how important motivation is for human beings. How important is motivation for you? How motivated are you to help others? It also has a lot to do with your own self-esteem, how you view yourself, right? Your own self-image. When I ask you, what's holding you back from getting it done? You define it. What is holding you back? You got to ask yourself, do I view myself as being able to achieve it? Or is everybody else better than me? They're the ones that have to do it. Because we'll see celebrities on television, all over the place. Any one of you can be one of those celebrities. They weren't created with something you weren't created with. They have all the resources that you have, all the access to knowledge that you have. What makes them different is that they've converted knowledge to action. And chances are, their self-esteem is high. So, let's talk a little bit about learned helplessness, right? Over the years, we start to learn that we're helpless. We talked about it in the first episode when we said that people usually say, they attribute problems or the causes of problems when it's somebody else to dispositional factors, which is things that are inside the person. Oh, this person's rude because he's a rude person. And he's always a rude person, and anytime you see him, he's a rude person. Right? Whereas when it comes to ourselves, I was just having a bad day. I'm not always like this. If you caught me in a different setting, I would have been different, right? So if you go back to one of the early episodes, you'll know exactly what we mean. Learned helplessness is the opposite. When we look at ourselves, when we make mistakes, when we do wrong things, we think that it has something to do with us. And when we think that it's persistent, it's always going to happen. And we think that no matter what the situation is, we're always going to be a failure. We have to focus, because self-confidence and self-esteem is not simply about feeling good about yourself. It's about doing what you believe is right, no matter what anybody else thinks. We don't need to go too much into it. We will admit our own mistakes, and we learn from them. We're willing to take risks. And you know what? It's okay to make mistakes. And allowing others to congratulate our accomplishments. Not necessarily by saying, good job, you were excellent and all that stuff, but no, acknowledging, alhamdulillah, I feel good, I did a good deed today. Compare that with somebody who belittles themselves. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, let not any of you belittle themselves. Don't belittle yourself. Of course, the Sahaba wanted to know, what do you mean, belittle ourselves? He said that you find a matter concerning Allah and you say nothing. You do nothing. And I want you to just ponder for a moment. A matter concerning Allah? What does that mean? It could mean so much. But put one thing, remember that one time where you knew you had to do something. You knew you had to stand up. You knew you had to bring up all of your self-esteem and do something. It was your life purpose. You were brought to this moment to get a task done, and you didn't do it. That person that's belittled on the Day of Judgment, they'll be raised up, and Allah the Almighty, their Creator, our Creator, will say, why didn't you do anything? Why didn't you say such and such about such and such? And the person will say, out of fear of people, Ya Allah, I was afraid of people. And Allah the Almighty will say, rather it is I who you should have feared. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Love for my brother what I love for myself, only Allah do I worship and asking for help every day. 5 times must I always pray. I am proud to be a Muslim now. Everyone say La